The night over the Persian Gulf was unusually quiet, but sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that carry the loudest warnings. Far from the world's television cameras and political speeches, a massive container ship pushed slowly through the dark water, its engines humming like a distant heartbeat beneath the steel deck. Above the vessel, the sky stretched wide and endless, filled with stars that seemed peaceful to anyone watching from land. But on this night, peace was only an illusion. In the control room of the ship, faint electronic signals began appearing on radar screens, small alerts that seemed harmless at first but quickly formed a pattern no experienced sailor could ignore. Drone activity reported in nearby airspace, missile warnings detected across military channels, naval patrols shifting positions along the narrow sea passage. What had started as a routine commercial journey through one of the most important waterways on Earth was quietly transforming into something much larger, something far more dangerous. The crew did not yet know it, but the waters beneath their hull were becoming the front line of a global energy struggle, a struggle shaped by the tension of a growing Iran and Israel war and the involvement of powerful nations whose interests stretched far beyond the horizon. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been known as one of the most critical choke points in the world's energy network. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, yet nearly one-fifth of the planet's oil supply flows through this thin corridor every single day. Tankers loaded with crude oil, liquefied natural gas carriers, and container ships filled with industrial goods all pass through this narrow stretch of water like blood moving through the veins of the global economy. If this artery slows down, the world feels the pressure immediately. Fuel prices rise, markets react, governments become nervous. And in times of conflict, this narrow sea lane becomes more than just a shipping route, it becomes a strategic weapon. In recent years, tensions across the Middle East have grown steadily more intense. Military alliances have shifted, proxy conflicts have expanded, and new technologies like armed drones have changed the nature of warfare itself. The growing confrontation surrounding the Iran and Israel war has pushed the region closer to a dangerous threshold where every movement in the Persian Gulf carries global consequences. On the deck of the container ship moving through the darkness, the crew members focused on their tasks with quiet professionalism. Many of them had spent years at sea, traveling through ports across Asia, Europe, and Africa. They understood storms, mechanical failures, and the unpredictable nature of the ocean. But geopolitical tension is a different kind of storm, one that arrives without clouds and often without warning. As the ship approached the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz, additional alerts began to appear across international shipping networks. Several commercial vessels ahead had reported unidentified drones flying high above the water. Naval forces operating in the region had increased surveillance patrols, and encrypted security bulletins warned that the situation could escalate quickly. The captain studied the radar screens carefully, knowing that merchant ships like theirs carried no weapons and very limited defensive systems. Their only protection was distance, communication, and the hope that they would not become targets in a conflict far beyond their control. Across the region, military commanders were monitoring the same developments with growing concern. The Persian Gulf has long been a crossroads of international power, where the strategic interests of major nations intersect with the energy resources of the Middle East. The United States maintains a significant naval presence in nearby waters, while regional forces from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf nations operate patrol fleets designed to secure their own coastlines. Israel, although not physically bordering the Gulf, has increasingly become part of the region's strategic calculations due to its ongoing confrontation with Iranian influence. The rising tension associated with the Iran and Israel war has transformed the wider Middle East into a complex chessboard where every move carries risks and consequences. Analysts, diplomats, and military leaders understand that a single miscalculation in the Strait of Hormuz could ripple outward across the entire global economy. Back on the ship, the crew began to sense the tension building in subtle ways. Communication channels were suddenly filled with more frequent updates from maritime authorities. Nearby vessels were adjusting their speed and spacing as they approached the narrow shipping lanes of the strait. Even the radar screens seemed more alive than usual, with signals moving slowly across the digital map like silent warnings. The captain knew that this waterway allowed only a narrow corridor for ships traveling in each direction, meaning that hundreds of massive vessels often passed within a few miles of one another. In normal times, the system worked smoothly, guided by strict navigation protocols and international cooperation. But when military tension rises, the same crowded passage can quickly become a place of uncertainty and fear. Far above the sea, satellites continued scanning the region, capturing images of naval movements, air patrol routes, and suspicious activity along the coastlines. Intelligence analysts working through the night tried to understand whether the alerts represented routine military exercises or the early signs of something far more serious. reports suggested that defensive mines might have been placed near strategic shipping routes, while surveillance drones were mapping vessel movements across the strait. Each new piece of information added another layer of tension to a situation already charged with uncertainty. The container ship continued forward, its powerful engines pushing it deeper into the narrow waters that connect the Persian Gulf to the open ocean beyond. For the crew, this was simply another voyage across a familiar route. Yet the invisible forces surrounding them were shifting rapidly. The growing conflict across the Middle East, shaped by alliances, rivalries, and the expanding shadow of the Iran and Israel war, was turning this ordinary journey into something historic. The sailors could not see the geopolitical strategies unfolding around them, but they could feel the atmosphere changing in the quiet signals of radar screens and security warnings. In the darkness of the Persian Gulf, the line between commerce and conflict was beginning to blur, and the next hours would reveal just how fragile the balance of peace in this vital waterway had become. As the container ship moved deeper into the narrow corridor of the Strait of Hormuz, the calm surface of the water began to feel deceptive, like a quiet stage moments before a storm. The crew could not see the invisible tension stretching across the Middle East, but every signal arriving through the ship's communication system hinted that the situation around them was changing rapidly. Military aircraft were now patrolling higher in the night sky, their distant engines occasionally echoing over the dark water. Warships positioned throughout the Persian Gulf had increased their alert levels, and satellite surveillance was tracking unusual movements along several coastlines. For the sailors aboard the vessel, the ocean had always represented freedom and opportunity, a place where trade connected continents and where the rhythm of global commerce moved steadily forward. Yet on this night the sea seemed to carry a different message, one shaped by uncertainty and the growing pressure of a geopolitical crisis that had been building for years. The Strait of Hormuz has always been more than just a maritime passage. It is a strategic gateway linking the oil-rich Gulf region to international markets, a narrow corridor that carries enormous economic significance. Nearly 20 million barrels of oil move through this passage every day, along with vast shipments of natural gas and manufactured goods. Energy from the Middle East powers factories in Asia, fuels transportation networks in Europe, and supports industries across the Americas. Because of this, even a small disruption in the strait can send shockwaves through global markets. Investors monitor it carefully, governments build strategies around it, and military forces remain ready to respond if the flow of energy is threatened. The crew members on the container ship understood this importance in a practical way. They had sailed through these waters many times, often seeing massive oil tankers moving slowly in parallel lanes, each one carrying millions of barrels of crude oil destined for refineries across the world. Normally this traffic represented stability and cooperation, but during periods of tension it could also represent vulnerability. In recent months, the geopolitical environment surrounding the region had become increasingly volatile. The expanding conflict, widely described as the Iran and Israel war, had drawn international attention and raised concerns that the confrontation could spread beyond its original boundaries. Political analysts warned that the Persian Gulf might become a central stage in this struggle because of its critical energy infrastructure. If hostile forces attempted to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, the consequences would be immediate and far-reaching. Oil prices could surge overnight, shipping insurance rates could skyrocket, and international supply chains could face serious delays. The global economy, already sensitive to energy fluctuations, would feel the pressure almost instantly. These realities were being discussed in government offices, financial institutions, and military command centers around the world. Yet for the sailors navigating the narrow waterway, the situation was far more personal. They were physically present in the very place where those strategic concerns might suddenly become reality. Inside the ship's navigation bridge, the radar screens continued scanning the surrounding sea and sky. The glowing displays showed nearby vessels moving carefully along designated shipping lanes, their positions marked by steady digital signals. The captain watched these movements closely, understanding that coordination and communication were essential in such a crowded waterway. At the same time, security bulletins arriving through maritime networks reported that several unidentified drones had been observed earlier in the region. These unmanned aircraft had become a defining feature of modern conflict, capable of surveillance, targeting, and even direct attacks. Their presence in the skies above a busy shipping lane created an atmosphere of quiet anxiety. Merchant ships like the one crossing the strait carried enormous cargo value, but possessed almost no means of defending themselves against military threats. Their mission was simple: deliver goods safely from one port to another. Yet when geopolitical tensions escalate, even a civilian vessel can find itself sailing through the center of global power struggles. Across the broader Middle East, leaders and strategists were carefully evaluating the risks. Military planners understood that the Strait of Hormuz represents one of the world's most sensitive choke points. Because the passage is so narrow, shipping lanes are tightly controlled, leaving little room for maneuver if a crisis occurs. Mines, missiles, or coordinated drone attacks could potentially block the route, forcing vessels to stop or reroute thousands of miles around the Arabian Peninsula. Such a disruption would affect not only oil shipments but also food supplies, industrial materials, and commercial products moving between continents. The economic impact could ripple through international markets within hours. These realities explain why global powers maintain such a strong presence in nearby waters. Naval patrols, surveillance aircraft, and intelligence networks all operate continuously in an effort to prevent exactly that kind of scenario. Still, despite these precautions, the possibility of sudden escalation always exists in regions where political tensions run deep. The container ship continued advancing slowly through the darkness, its navigation lights reflecting faintly off the calm water. The crew carried out their responsibilities with disciplined focus, yet many of them felt the weight of the moment. They knew that the events unfolding across the Middle East were not just distant headlines, but forces that could shape the very waters beneath their vessel. The growing confrontation surrounding the Iran and Israel war had created an atmosphere where every radar signal, every security bulletin, and every unusual movement in the sky carried new meaning. What once seemed like an ordinary shipping route now felt like a fragile corridor where commerce and conflict stood side by side. Beyond the horizon, the geopolitical struggle continued to evolve, driven by national interests, regional rivalries, and the immense importance of energy resources. The sailors could not predict what decisions might be made in distant capitals or military headquarters, but they understood one powerful truth. The stability of the Strait of Hormuz affects billions of people who may never see its waters. Factories depend on its energy shipments, transportation networks rely on its fuel supplies, and entire economies function because vessels move safely through this narrow passage. In moments like this, when tensions rise and uncertainty spreads across the region, the value of resilience becomes clear. History shows that even in times of conflict, cooperation and determination can protect the vital systems that keep the world connected. And as the ship moved steadily forward into the night, its crew carried with them a quiet reminder that courage and responsibility are often tested in the most unexpected places. Far from headlines but at the very heart of global events, the ship continued its slow journey through the narrow throat of the Strait of Hormuz. And although the sea looked calm, the world beyond the horizon was anything but peaceful. In distant capitals, leaders studied intelligence briefings and satellite images, trying to understand how the growing crisis across the Middle East might unfold. News channels around the globe spoke increasingly about the Iran and Israel war, analyzing its political impact, its military risks, and its potential to expand beyond the borders where it had begun. But for the crew sailing quietly through the Persian Gulf, this conflict was not simply a topic of debate or speculation. It was something they could feel in the constant stream of security alerts arriving on their navigation systems, in the sudden appearance of patrol aircraft overhead, and in the uneasy silence that settled across the deck each time a distant engine echoed through the night sky. The sea, which had always represented opportunity and connection, now seemed to hold an invisible tension stretching across every mile of water. Throughout history, the Strait of Hormuz has stood as one of the most important gateways on Earth. It connects the oil-rich Persian Gulf to the wider oceans, allowing energy resources to reach countries thousands of miles away. Every day, enormous tankers carry millions of barrels of oil through this narrow passage, fueling industries, transportation systems, and households around the world. When the flow through this strait remains stable, global markets operate with confidence. But when uncertainty appears here, the consequences spread rapidly across continents. Traders react instantly to any sign of disruption. Governments begin calculating emergency reserves. Shipping companies reassess routes and insurance costs. The stability of this single waterway has the power to influence economic decisions in cities that may never even see the Gulf's blue horizon. This reality is what makes the region so sensitive during times of geopolitical conflict. The tension surrounding the Iran and Israel war has drawn global attention precisely because the stakes extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. On the bridge of the ship, the radar screens continued scanning the surrounding waters with steady precision. Signals from nearby vessels appeared as glowing points of light, each representing another cargo carrier moving carefully along the designated lanes. These ships came from many nations, carrying products ranging from crude oil to electronics, grains, vehicles, and industrial machinery. In peaceful times, this international flow of trade reflects the interconnected nature of the modern world. A single container might hold equipment manufactured in Asia, destined for factories in Europe, supporting industries that employ workers across multiple continents. The sea lanes that cross the Persian Gulf are therefore more than just shipping routes. They are the lifelines of global cooperation. Yet, when conflict threatens those routes, the vulnerability of this system becomes clear. The same narrow channel that enables efficiency also creates risk, because so much of the world's energy supply passes through one small geographic corridor. As the vessel moved forward, the captain remained focused on maintaining a steady course through the strait. Years of maritime experience had taught him that the ocean often reflects the character of human decisions made far away. Political negotiations, military strategies, and diplomatic relationships can shape what happens even in the most remote waters. The growing confrontation surrounding the Iran and Israel war had already altered the atmosphere across the region. Surveillance patrols were more frequent, communication channels were more active, and every unusual signal received immediate attention from maritime authorities. For the sailors, these developments served as a reminder that the stability of international trade depends not only on ships and ports, but also on the fragile balance of political understanding among nations. Despite the tension surrounding them, the crew continued performing their duties with quiet discipline. Some monitored navigation equipment, ensuring the ship remained precisely within the narrow traffic lane. Others inspected cargo systems, confirming that the containers stacked high above the deck were secure. A few sailors stood outside beneath the open sky, watching the distant lights of other vessels and listening to the rhythm of the ship's engines. In moments like these, the ocean can inspire deep reflection. The vastness of the sea reminds those who travel it that humanity shares a single planet, one where cooperation often proves stronger than conflict. Even in regions touched by political rivalry, the need for stability, trade, and energy connects countries in ways that cannot easily be ignored. Far beyond the ship, analysts, economists, and diplomats continued evaluating the wider consequences of the crisis. They understood that the Strait of Hormuz represents more than geography. It symbolizes how interconnected the world has become. Energy transported through this corridor powers cities across continents, supports industries employing millions of people, and sustains the modern way of life many societies depend upon. When tensions such as the Iran and Israel war threaten to disrupt this flow, the entire international community begins searching for solutions that can prevent escalation. Diplomacy, negotiation, and strategic caution become essential tools in preserving stability. As dawn slowly approached over the Persian Gulf, the first faint light began to appear along the horizon, turning the dark sea into a shimmering field of silver. The container ship continued moving steadily toward the open waters beyond the strait, leaving behind the narrow passage that had carried such weight in global affairs. For the crew, the experience served as a powerful reminder that even ordinary people can find themselves witnessing moments shaped by history. They had traveled through a place where economics, politics, and human determination intersect in ways that affect billions of lives. And in that realization lies an important lesson for everyone watching and listening. The future of our world depends not only on power or conflict, but also on awareness, resilience, and the willingness to seek stability even in times of uncertainty. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.